message from our sponsor, the Royal Literary Fund.
Are you a professional writer struggling with financial difficulties? The Royal Literary Fund is here to support you. At the RLF, we believe that every writer deserves a chance to thrive, no matter what life throws your way. We offer a variety of hardship grants tailored to help professional writers in need, whether it's short-term relief or ongoing support. Perhaps you're dealing with an unexpected expense, a drop in income, or facing challenges that make writing difficult, such as illness, disability, or now relying on your pension. If you're eligible, our grants team will walk you through our discreet and confidential application process, ensuring you receive the support you need. Visit rlf.org.uk to check your eligibility and inquire today. The Royal Literary Fund. We believe writers matter because writing matters.
Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, we speak with the novelist Jacqueline Wilson.
We spoke to Jacqueline about starting out in magazines while in her teens, about breaking out in 1991 as a children's author with the story of Tracy Beaker, and about writing for adults, most recently in Think Again.
We recorded this episode in collaboration with Hay Festival, and it's a great listen, which we hope you enjoy.
Jacqueline, welcome to Always Take Notes. It's fantastic to have you on the show.
I'm delighted to take part.
Could we start with the first sleepover title?
Okay.
You said that you thought it was a kind of minor work of yours. When did you realise that it was much more major than you realised?
When I got chatting to people, particularly when I wrote my first adult novel in a long time, people often mentioned Sleepover, which was a short book written about 25 years ago. It wasn't one of my major titles, but people seemed to use it, to read it when they were 8 or 9, and at the age when you're desperate to have a sleepover and you're not considered quite old enough. And then, but people said they went back to it when they had flu or were upset about their first boyfriend breaking up with them. And I thought, this is lovely. Everybody needs a comfort book. And then also the business side of me took off, and sometime everything changed during COVID. And so people started sending me royalty things, but how much very old titles had actually sold. And so for the first time ever, I could look things up, going back to that list that I'd been sent. Oh, goodness me, Sleepover had done so well for itself, a rival to a story of Tracy Beaker. And so I thought, this is really interesting. And then I thought about the characters. And the first time round, I hope I was sensitive about Lily, this sister who's actually got cerebral palsy, but I don't mention that particularly. Just, the reader finds out she's non-verbal and can't walk. But since writing that, and I tried to imagine what it would be like and what it would be like to have your sister in this situation. But since then, I've been to various different special schools and met all sorts of different people and had learnt about Makaton as a sign language that many, many people found very useful, and they could really express their personalities that way. And I just thought, okay, let's go back to those two sisters, Daisy and Lily. And although Daisy is the sort of narrator, and is indeed the narrator of the Seaside Sleepover, they actually, Lily is just as much an ordinary, fun, mischievous girl, well, I hope she is, as her sister Daisy. And I have had lovely feedback from people getting somebody else possibly to type for them, but said how much this means to them. In fact, only last week I met a pair of sisters, like they were just like Daisy and Lily grown up, and they were so touching because they did say just how much it was like them, and the relationship between the sisters was gorgeous. So I feel it's lovely to have tried to get it right so that it makes a difference to people who life isn't just quite as easygoing as other people's lives are, and so that to hope that children who might never have thought about what it's like to be in a wheelchair and not to be able to speak might have just some inkling about what it takes. So, and then with the very latest Seaside Sleepover book, I have found out from meeting lots of people with different disabilities at special schools how now this new thing about having wheelchairs to hire with huge wheels, so that anybody with various disabilities can be in their wheelchair and still go over the sand instead of sinking in it and just have fun on the beach. So, I mean, basically I write books for children's enjoyment, but if they can have a tiny weeny social impact too, great.
And in the new book in the series, the girls are the same age, but the setting is up to date. So when the bully character Chloe wants to show off in front of her peer group, she does so by boasting that a TikTok influencer will be coming to her sleepover. What was it like, updating that, bringing up their experience of childhood to the mid-2020s?
It's fun if I can understand it. You will find very few people in my books rely all the time on watching things on their mobile phones. And writing my adult book, luckily I had a lovely editor who's 30-something, and just occasionally I get my technical terms wrong and she gently helps me. But with TikTok, although I'm not on it, but I have had experience making funny little clips for it, which seem to have worked. And many people that I wouldn't imagine would ever watch it say, oh, that was an absolute scream when you did such and such. So in a way, I don't know much about what happens on it, and it seems to have an overwhelming influence on what some young women want to read. But from my point of view, it's a good thing. So, but I'm not saying necessarily that I think it totally is, because I get frightened about people's powers of concentration, and I believe everything on TikTok is very short and sweet, or short and sour. But I like a half-hour program of something or other, and I like to read a proper book, not just something very short that you can read in an hour. But that's me just showing my age, I expect.
Not at all. So is it kind of fair to say that in your books you use technology as a way of exploring those themes of kind of friendship and conflict and the difficult dynamics, particularly between girls of a certain age?
I mean, I do touch on that because I want readers to feel that I know what I'm doing. But generally speaking, I love, if they're quite youngish girls, them to imagine things and do different things and play things and, lead a life that I think is good for children and that they can enjoy. It's what's so difficult now is that if you develop interest, particularly children, when they're really quite young, looking at all sorts of content on a screen, it's hard to wean them off it. And some people would say, well, why on earth would you? And I mean, everybody's got their own point of view. I personally would, think books are the very best and develop your language and your enjoyment and get your imagination working. And yet, funnily enough, when I was young, it was always get your head out of that book and do something useful, so that, times change.
And we also saw elsewhere that you've commented that adults often underestimate the significance of betrayal in children's lives and worlds. And we saw you'd said that children not having a best friend or losing their best friend is a really serious thing. Parents often take the attitude, don't worry, you'll get in another group soon. But you describe it as agony. Do you think that there is a sense from the adult perspective that it is easy to belittle what this experience is like?
I think it's more comforting for adults if they don't think their child is really desperately upset. I don't think you can help it. I know nowadays that many adults try very hard indeed to make life easy and warm and comfortable for their children. And why wouldn't you want that for them? But I do think adults sometimes either don't ask or don't try and engage with what is precisely going on in their children's lives. I mean, I'm haunted by the fact that one time, waiting with other mums outside the school for our daughters to come out when they were about 8, and the mum was telling me all about the hideousness of her separating from her husband and everything, and how she didn't know how she's going to cope, etc., etc. She said, but thank goodness, and then she said her child's name, hasn't got a clue. She doesn't even know, and she's so happy-go-lucky. Well, I happen to know that little girl had been crying on my daughter's shoulder for weeks and saying what was going to happen, and her classwork had gone down rapidly, and this was tearing this child apart, and yet mum didn't know, or maybe didn't want to know. And I do think adults just don't know. I just got such vivid memories of different things that happened. I had a best friend in my year 6 at primary school, and her mum was dying of cancer, and this little girl had to go home every lunchtime and sort her mum out and feed her and change her and everything, and then come back again to school. And that was her life day after day while her father worked and her older sister had left home, and it was driving her absolutely crazy. And our teacher had no idea what was going on. And then even her mum died the day before we took our 11 plus, and she was expected to sit down and take her 11 plus, and God bless her, she passed. So that was, something that she managed. But, children can live parallel lives and are very, very good at hiding things. And so I think, I don't know why, but I haven't forgotten all the details of my childhood. Perhaps it's because I didn't have a desperately happy childhood myself. And if you ask me what I did last year, I'd stare at you blankly. Ask me what I did when I was 10 or 12 or whatever. I know vividly still. So these things are sort of there in my head. And I write my books just to entertain children, but I also write them that if they're going through a hard time, or a friend of theirs is, to comfort them and to show that even if your parents aren't quite looking after you the way that we would feel they should be, that there's generally some adults somewhere that if you confide in them, they will try and help. And if not, the wonderful thing is that no matter how hard time you're having, you get older and then you get independent and you have a chance of choosing your own life. So that, I sound like Pollyanna now, but I do think, maybe I'm writing the sort of books that I would have responded to when I was young, because children's books in the 1950s say, you never had parents splitting up or even arguing. And you did have death in children's books, but it was a very unrealistic sort of death. Very, look, she's looking up for Jesus or whatever.
What were the sort of books that you read when you were young? You touched on what they were like, but what were the types that you did enjoy?
I learnt to read really by reading Enid Blyton, because she was very easy to read. I didn't care for the famous 5 or Secret 7s. I've never really liked sort of adventure stories, but I loved the Faraway Tree books and desperately adored Silky the Fairy and loved the idea of going up this tree and seeing, magic lands up above. And imagine my own versions. So when about 5 years ago, Hachette asked if I would do, not a changed Faraway Tree, but just have modern children visiting, and I could make things up about them, whatever I wanted. I did jump at that chance because it was fun reliving, my whole childhood experience. And then I did a Christmas Faraway Tree, and that became, I tried my best and hopefully it worked, but I thought, that's it for now, done that bit. And I was asked also if I would do one of her school stories, but, the boarding school ones. But I said that then my own personality and writing ability would not want to write about all these girls good at hockey and lacrosse and chosen for the cricket team and saying, oh, isn't it spiffing? I said that if I wrote one, I couldn't help it. I'd be the scholarship child that was scorned by everybody. And couldn't do anything right. And I said, that's not what you want. These are nostalgic books, aren't they? So, and the editor did agree with me. No, probably it wasn't quite my thing. So never did that.
So you grew up on a council estate in Kingston. Your parents had what you described as a loveless relationship, but you were writing from very early on. So could you tell us about Meet the Maggots, this 21-page novel that you wrote when you were 9?
It's sadly not the work of an infant phenomenon, but it was, and I've got it somewhere still, and it's written in that terrible brown school ink that you used to have in a school notebook, but it was for a project, and my teacher then, Mr. Townsend, was the one teacher I totally adored. Every single child adored him, and he knew I liked writing, and so instead of doing a conventional project, he said, I said, can I write a novel, sir? And he was so sweet. He didn't laugh at me. He said, certainly. And so I did. And it was about a large family, and they were poor. And it was very much a forerunner of many of my books, with the child characters having many of the same characteristics of the fictional children I write about today. And it also makes me see that hopefully my style has sharpened up and my ability to make it a proper book. But you can't really change the sort of person you are, to fit into a market or anything. That was the way I was, and that's the way I'm still going to be. I mean, I did compromise for a long, long time to try to make some money. I wrote magazine stories, but I wrote them always in the morning to get them out the way. And then the afternoon, until my daughter came home from school, was my writing whichever novel I was writing, or children's book. And it was tiring, but it also meant that I really couldn't afford to waste time having writer's block. I just had to get on with it because, the one joyful thing about being a female writer is that it's hard when they're babies, certainly, but once they can attend sort of a morning nursery school or something, you can take them there. You can maybe have 2.5 hours before you go and collect them, and you've only got this limited time, so you apply yourself and write every single minute that you can, and then you can be happy for mummy playing with your child at some other time. And it's just, writers don't have to make any of those agonizing choices. Shall I put my child into a day nursery and carry on with the job that I adore? Or should I sit at home with my child and feel lonely and unfulfilled? I mean, it's a horrible choice to make, but I didn't have to make it, thank goodness.
You mentioned your magazine work, and we saw a rumour that Jackie magazine was in fact named after you. Can you verify or deny? And what was that experience like? What were the kind of stories that you were producing?
It was, I had to do a shorthand and typing course at 16. I had to leave school because my parents didn't believe in further education. Can you imagine that? And my mum always used to say, no, that head teacher, she just probably gets, a couple of pounds more in her salary for every kid that does A-level, so you're not doing it. So, you can't argue with that at that time. And so I did a shorthand and typing course, didn't like it particularly, but made friends doing it. And then I saw an advert in a paper that literally said, in amongst the situations vacant thing, wanted teenage writers. And what my parents had done was given me a second-hand typewriter for my birthday. And so I wrote up for more details, and this was a big magazine that was coming out the following year. And so I wrote something slightly different, not a lovey-dovey story, a bit chirpy and a bit sort of truthful about what it's really like to, you know, not have any boyfriend when you go dancing and all the rest of it. And I think some young sub-editor saw it and said, "Oh, she's talking about me." And anyway, they paid me for it. 3 guineas. Shows you how long ago it was. £3, 3 old shillings. And then after me bombarding them with magazine stories, they offered me a job up there, which was a big step. I've never been to Scotland, but I got booked into the Church of Scotland Girls' Hostel, and I was idiotic enough to think, oh, I'm going to have a really free time now and go out every evening dancing or whatever. And we had a boot-faced matron who was very, very fierce with us. But I made friends in the hostel, which was good. And then I loved work, and I didn't want to be a magazine journalist, but anything that was to do with writing. And thank God I had the sense to see this was good experience. I had learnt that, you know, if your stuff wasn't in by Friday, that was no use. No excuse could be given. And if you did it too often, you were out of a job. And I tried hard, and I did adapt my writing style to the rather tiresome magazine style. And there were 2 men in charge of women's and girls' fiction, Mr. Cuthbert and Mr. Tate, who sound like a musical thing. And they were rather sweet, and they were worried because I was the youngest journalist there and miles and miles away from home. And so they had me go in to see them every Friday. And then one of them said to me, by the way, this new magazine, new full-colour teenage girl magazine, said, we've decided to name it after you, Jackie. Now, they did honestly say that. Whether that was actually true or not, because somebody else in DC Thomson said, no, it was a sort of decision that we all made. I don't know. Who cares? Jackie was a big name. Every blooming hairdresser was called Jackie's or something. And also there were upmarket Jackies like Jackie Kennedy. And so it was very much an early 60s name. But sort of going there, I learnt on really weird magazines like Red Letter, which was old-fashioned love stories. So I learned to be versatile. And then I worked on a women's magazine called Annabelle. This young girl, 18, never held a baby. They asked me to write a mother and baby column. And I looked at Dr. Spock, which was the big manual at the time, and I hung out in the main town. And every time I saw a woman with a toddler, I was very shy too. I don't know how I had the gump, but asked them, saying, I'm working for DC Thomson's. Can you tell me what life is like and what's your big problem with your baby or toddler or whatever? And they all unbelievably spoke to me. And so I gathered knowledge quickly. And it's amazing what you can get away with no experience whatsoever. And so possibly I needed to reread my columns when I had my own lovely daughter at 21, but still. So, you know, it was good training. And then for a long time giving talks when I became much better known. If it was a family thing, I'd always drop in the mention of Jackie magazine, particularly if I needed to have a good cough or wipe my nose, because all the women was, oh my God, Jackie magazine. Oh, I used to read the agony columns and all the rest of it. And it gave me just a little bit breather to recompose myself and then carry on. So can't really do it so much now because it's only much older people that really know what Jackie was like.
Could you tell us now about your first steps to publishing books? So we saw that your first book was called Ricky's Birthday. And we're always interested when we talk to writers, particularly about their first books, about how it worked in terms of getting a publishing deal, whether there was an agent involved, how they navigated that part. So take us back to that period of your life.
Right. Well, when I was living in the hostel, I think I wrote 2 full-length adult novels and 1 children's book when I was married at 19 and then having my daughter at 21. And they were all turned down. mostly they wrote quite nice letters. I was such an idiot. I didn't realize that generally that doesn't happen, and they want to be nice to you but think you might have a spark of something going for you. So I gave up on those. I mean, how I could have been so wet, I don't know. But then I was still writing lots of stories for magazines, etc., and writing little tiny stories for my 2-year-old daughter. And then I was at the library with her, and she was sitting down with the picture books, and I'd finished reading to her and saw a line of books on a shelf that were those beginning to read books. And I was fascinated by them because they were all clearly for kids or council estates, or kids who didn't have a mummy and a daddy and a lovely house with a green hedge. And, one was called Who's Coming in the Van with Me? And another one was saying Fish and Chips for Supper. And I thought, I like these. And so I took out several on my daughter's ticket and thought I could have a go at doing one of these. So there were 32 pages. I had no idea the standard for that type of book. And I realized that it would only need to be 30 pages because there's the title thing at the beginning and the endy bit at the end. And that each page had a sort of colourful illustration. And so there was about 2 or 3 sentences of text on each page. So I drew out on a big sketchbook, did all the 30 pages, and then tried to fit a story about a little boy trying to make sure he had a good birthday present all the way through, with a little moral, because the present that he eventually gets didn't cost anything. It's a little rabbit that somebody's pet rabbit has given birth to. Not the finest of stories, but I mean, you had a brother on a motorbike and a sister working in the hairdressers. Nowadays, I would switch the genders around. So that was the sort of thing you did. And he goes around the market and speaks to people. And I was really writing about my sort of background. And the series was actually edited by Lila Berg, who was a big presence in the latter part of the 20th century, and very much fighting the cause for children's needs and children who needed a little bit of a leg up and everything. And I sent it off to her, and no idea that all these other books had been properly commissioned. I think she thought, this person's got a cheek, but actually she's got it spot on. I think it helped that I'd taken the pains to make it absolutely perfectly match everything. And so she bought it. I was thrilled. It wasn't the start of a long career with this children's reader called Nippers, because I wrote her another one and that didn't quite fit the bill. And so I thought, I'm going to have to try another. And then after the second series, the Nippers closed down. Sadly, I'm not sure that they were actually a big success, because you need schools to take them up if they are. And probably schools were more aspirational about let's try and make our children more middle class. Whereas Lila Berg's idea was, right, let's accept these children as wonderful kids as they are, and let's give them something that they want to read. So, times change. I mean, I think Lila Berg, if she were alive now, would be so fated and much, much more well-known than she ever was. But I never met her, but I was grateful to her. And then that started me off writing for young children, and I wrote many different small books and loved doing it. And then eventually I wrote Teenage Story and tried it with various publishers. I didn't have an agent at that time. And I sent it eventually to Oxford University Press. They kept it 9 months. But I didn't actually write to them and say, look, do you want it or not? I mean, I was a bit scared about doing that. And actually hanging on was good, because they suddenly got in touch and said, yes, we'd like to publish it. Come to Oxford and we'll discuss it. And I rather think the only reason was not the quality of my writing or my characteristics or anything, but the editor in charge had, I think, I don't know if he had had the experience of the girl in the book who wanted to find her missing father or not, because she'd just been brought up by a different family. Who knows? But it was some personal reason why he liked it. But I thought, I don't care. As long as he publishes the book, that's fine.
Tracking back just very briefly, you mentioned kind of a couple of books that you'd written before you started writing for children. Am I right in thinking that they were crime novels? Oh,
my crime novels did get published. The ones that didn't get published, I mean, one was, I remember a children's book with the deathly title, The Magic Music Box, which I used as a device to get my ordinary children. I don't think the characterization of the children was at fault. The fault was the genre, because then there's some magical music box, gubbins, and it gets them to a desert island in a really not a clever way at all. And that's how they manage on the island. It's just an awkward book. It wasn't quite working. I think another one was a kind of John Wyndham-y sort of book about some terrible plague that had given people deformities, but if you just had a tiny deformity, you kept away from the sort of the police who were thinking, no, we've got to cleanse everything. I mean, the subject's nothing to do with the way I really needed to write. And then I wrote, after my daughter's birth, I wrote a book about two women from very different personalities and different classes, but how they bonded because they both, were lonely and sad and met up wheeling their babies and what happened with them. It wasn't a sort of falling in love with each other book. It was a more just a companionship book, really. And that was called, God, Women Must Weep. Terrible, terrible title. And that, no, that didn't get published either. No wonder. But I did then write some crime stories. I didn't mean to write crime stories. It's not a genre I'm particularly interested in, but it was about two little girls getting kidnapped. And it was also the point of view of the person who was weird and creepy, but hopefully you could understand why. And it was, I never reread my stuff, but I think it worked quite well. But the publisher, which was Macmillan, but they wanted it on their crime list. And I thought, well, I don't want to write crime, but I do want to be published by Macmillan, classy publisher. And so I wrote more crime books for them. And they got overexcited when they found out I was then married to a policeman. And they thought I might like to write police procedurals. No. And also, alarmingly, people started to think that my ex-husband was giving me plots. No, it was all to do with me. And I had quite enough of being a policeman's wife in my real life. I didn't want to write about it. Although for the silly magazines I wrote for, they had me actually write about 60 episodes of an ongoing series about Policeman's Wife. That was what it was called. But you couldn't write what it was really like. They had me being a village policeman's wife, and I tried to comfort people and actually solve a crime and everything. It was a load of old toffee, but paid the bills.
This week's episode is brought to you by Readsy, the world's top marketplace for publishing professionals.
Whether you're writing your first book or your fifth, Readsy can help you take a real step into the world of publishing.
On their site, you'll find professional editors who have worked on everything from best-selling children's books to presidential memoirs and Booker-winning novels.
You can hire them as book coaches to guide you through the writing process, get detailed developmental notes to shape your next draft, or bring in a top-tier copy editor to polish your prose.
Browse through thousands of hand-picked editors from around the world, put together your shortlist, and start getting quotes today.
And, for listeners of Always Take Notes, Readsy is offering $50 off your first collaboration when you sign up at readsy.com/loves/notes.
That's reedsy.com/loves/notes.
Sign up today and give your book the best chance at success. You had a big breakthrough in 1991 with the story of Tracy Beaker. And we often find it interesting talking to writers who've had a big hit and asking them what factors made a book break through or break out. And often it's very difficult for them to say. But take us back to that time, to the origin of that project and then the experience of it gaining a higher profile.
Well, I saw an advert in the local paper. I think something had just come out about we must try and get more foster children in children's homes. About 35 years ago, many kids were being brought up in homes, and I think everybody knew an actual proper home environment rather than a big communal home would be better for the children. So there was a big push to get more children fostered, and they were actually having photographs of real children and then pieces about them which were really honest. So, so-and-so has difficulty making friends and has anger issues and everything. And I just thought, what is it like for these kids? They go to schools, friends might see this and might tease them or just humiliate them in some way. And so I wrote from the point of view of a child who certainly had issues, but was quite sparky and wanted to fight back with the system. And I wanted to write it in a different sort of way because I wanted it to have lots and lots of different illustrations as if she was doodling in all the books. And at that time, it was the original Transworld, and David Fickling who I vaguely knew from Oxford University Press, had gone to Transworld. And David always was up for something different. And he said, you want to write it like that? Fine. And then we'll find you the right illustrator to do all the many illustrations. And he had worked with Nick Sharratt in the past on poetry books. And so he got us together. And that was really seriously a match made in heaven. And we had a lovely working relationship for a very long time. Although nowadays, Nick started to rethink things in COVID and now wants to develop his own work much more. So we haven't broken friends, as all the little kids think. But I've now got lovely Rachel Dean, who does equally delightful illustrations. So I've been very lucky that far. But Tracy wasn't immediately a hit at all. It was a mild success, and I think Nick's illustrations certainly helped. And I hope people like the difference of the text and the fierceness of this child, the naughtiness of her. And yet I'm sure adults weren't necessarily that thrilled by it, but kids got it. I went around many schools at that time and I said, why do you think Tracy's so naughty and shouty? And every single time some child said, because she's unhappy and she's missing her mum. Yes, you've got it. But then there was a lovely woman and she worked for television. She wanted to do Tracy, and it was her idea to do animation for whenever Tracy had a bizarre thought. And that was just such a brilliant format. And she worked for the BBC, had schools television at that time, and she wanted it done for schools television. And it hung around for ages, and lots of other people said, no, she's not an aspirational character. No, it won't quite work on television, etc. God bless her, she still had faith in it. And then the school's television stopped, and it was taken over by mainstream television, and they decided to give it a go. They weren't very sure about it, but it was a hit. It was a big hit. And then everybody had been turning their nose up at it and thinking, no, this won't work. It suddenly really took off. And the television series, when it eventually came out, I mean, Danny Harmer was a dream, Tracy. poor soul is probably stopped in the street now saying, hey, you're Tracy Beaker or whatever. She was valiant, though, because there are a couple of books about Tracy Beaker grown up, told by her daughter Jess. And she did play Tracy then still. And some of the older members of the cast also, cropped up in those last ones. Sadly, they're no longer going on, but there is still a spin-off called The Dumping Ground, which has nothing really to do with anything that I've written. But it's amazing that that's over 30 years and that's still there. So I'm very grateful to Tracy Beaker.
When you were writing it 30 years ago, did you feel that it was something radical and different in terms of taking the inner lives of young women seriously, and also young women who are from not middle class, comfortable backgrounds?
I didn't really think about it that way. I've always known that I never really wanted to write jolly hockey stick sort of books about girls. And I was always far more interested in what they thought rather than what they did. So it was just natural to me. And I suppose the mood had slightly changed because in America, there were far more first-person accounts in children's books. And for certainly teenage books, there were a few angst-ridden teenagers there moaning about their lot. I don't know whether, they decided to accept Tracy Beaker because they were sensing a shift. But it was wonderful for me. And the sort of the titles that followed, and because I did endless school visits, things started to move upwards and then further upwards. And then the further you go, the more advertising you get from your publishers, things on buses and then tours around and suddenly being treated very specially, because the more you can earn for the company, the more they like you. And so I had a lovely long time I was never top of the tree. I mean, there's the J.K. Rowling books that were always inevitably much, much huger. And, there's always someone there rather than me. But I'm very happy with the way things were. I think realistically over the last few years, things had started to change. Children don't read any near as much as they used to. And they're very much more inclined to want either things with lots of farts and poos in them or sort of junior graphic novels like Dogman and Bunny versus Monkey. There's a shining example of Catherine Rundell, who writes exquisite children's books. And there are a few old soldiers like, I don't know, Michael Mapurga, that we carry on flying the banner. But it's harder to get children to read what I call proper books. But because last year the first adult novel came out where I use characters that I'd written about long ago when they were children or young teenagers, and now catching up with them. Now they're 30-something or 40. And that made a big stir because people who'd loved my books in the past suddenly thought, oh, she's written another one just for me. I'm the right age. And that, I think, has had a bit of effect on even the children's books now, because although the event I just did at the beginning of the afternoon was a lovely event and there were a lot of children there, but bizarrely there were a lot of adults there, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, who maybe, because I'm doing an actual adult thing tomorrow, and I just hope for the adult thing there aren't people who've brought in their children, because although it's certainly not 50 Shades of Grey, it's not really. I mean, they're adults. They have sex sometimes. They swear sometimes. And, you don't feel comfortable. And certainly I wouldn't imagine mothers feel comfortable if I start coming out with any of that. But who knows what might happen.
What is the male-female breakdown of readers for your children's books. We found an old interview from 1998 where you said you were kind of wary of writing boys because, you were a girl yourself, you had a daughter, that football and computers were not your thing. I mean, has your view on that shifted? And then, in terms of people who consume your fiction, how does it split?
I think, judging by events, the audience is at least 90% girls, even 95% girls. There was some lovely, valiant, sensitive boys, wonderful readers who might get in touch with me later on in their teens and tell me just how much my books meant to them. But mostly they're considered girly books. And even with the adult novels, there will be a few lovely, mostly gay young men, but mostly they're young women instead. I mean, I'm not anti-male in the slightest. It's just I didn't have brothers. I didn't have sons. I can easily write about an anguished little boy who gets teased, something like that. But your average nice little boy, I find quite difficult. And then they would be interested in football or playing Fortnite or whatever it's called. And the thought of doing all that research is just too much. Whereas little girls, I mean, yes, they're very much attached to their mobile phones, but I do know generally, particularly when they're little and they go through the mermaid phase and the unicorn phase, and then, they go to Claire's for their clothes, and it's just easier to bond with all of that.
You mentioned children not reading in the same way that they used to, and also earlier that you had a bit of a business brain. So was the decision to write Think Again partly a business decision that your audience was now of an age that still read voraciously and also was a kind of dedicated fan of yours?
That I didn't come first. The idea, I was discussing it once with my daughter over a glass of wine in the evening, and she said to me, have you ever thought what happened to all these girls that you wrote about when they were little? What are they doing now? And we had a hilarious evening sort of inventing things, and then discovered, I'm not on any social media, but apparently some young women had the same idea, particularly about the 4 girls books that I'd written about 13-year-olds. All their suggestions were entirely unpublishable, but very funny. And then from time to time, other people brought it up. I brought it up a couple of times, but it didn't seem the right time and people didn't think that would work. But then a lovely woman who's now gone off and got promoted to a different publisher asked me about it, and I jumped at the chance. And then I had this new editor, Thorne, and who's lovely and not a bit overawed by the fact that I've been writing for donkey's years, and wrote me, after I'd written my novel and sent it off, I had about 12 single type pages of notes about it. And I thought, actually, after reading it, I think, good God, because writing the children's books, I don't really get heavily edited at all. But then I thought, actually, you're onto something there. And yeah, I can see where you're going there. And it was good to be challenged, because if I'm going to do this, I want to make it the best I possibly can. And I worked really hard at it. And it was such a delight to me when the hardback came out. And I have sounded so pathetic, but to be number 2 on the Times fiction list, even if it was only for 1 week, it was so good. It really was, because I felt I'm back in action. And I can't help being competitive. I never used to be competitive. When our daughter was little, my ex-husband was quite brutal if we played Snap, and would always try to outwit her. And I mean, just a dreadful person with children. Well, and with adults too. But I never minded. I didn't really want to come first. But the first time somebody showed me that actually there are charts and you get to a certain point in the charts, And that was fatal. And then you care. I wish I didn't care, but I do. And it's very annoying. And because sometimes I'm not jealous exactly, but it's quite hard when you've been sort of really big and then maybe you're stopping being really big. But I've still kept on being published. But I think the success of the fiction hardback made people think, oh, the old girl maybe still got it in her. And I'm always up for traveling around and doing events and doing dumb daft TikTok things to try and publicize the book. And it does seem to work. So while I've still got the health and the determination, I think, I'm not stopping now. I'm going to carry on.
And while we're just picking up some of these points about the kind of business side of publishing, it's a rule of the podcast that we always ask about money and how it's interacted with people's writing lives. So be as open as you're comfortable with. But at what stage did it become clear that you could make a living from your fiction? And then at what point did it become comfortable?
I think it was probably about 3 books after the story of Tracy Beaker, and when suddenly there was a lot, people knew who I was in bookish world terms, rather than battling on for, I would say, 12 to 15 years of being vaguely known but not really. And then suddenly it started to be big. And Hay, I came to Hay on holiday with my ex and my lovely daughter for years before the festival happened. And then the festival was going 40 years. And then when I first went to the festival, I was a punter. I didn't do any talks. I sat and listened to the authors I admired, and that was that. And then when I was asked to take part, when things had got really quite big and my sales were big, and I did signings then, and that was a weird moment for me, because the festival that I'd attended in awe of other authors, suddenly I was there on the really big stage, sellout audience, and then for some reason you had to cross a road. Maybe it was when there was the school, I can't quite remember. We had to cross a road to get to the signing tent. There was police escorts, and I signed for about 5 hours. And I suddenly realized this is happening. This is real. And it was fantastic, tiring, but fantastic. So, I always love coming back to this festival because, I've got great friends with people who have the bookshops. I love buying books. And it's really interesting being in the green room and thinking, oh, there's so-and-so or whatever. But it's a delight, to approach a literary festival from one point of view, just because you like books and you admire some authors. And also seeing that, it makes you engage with your audience. They are the reason why you have not got any money worries at the moment, because you saw some top authors being very, yes, I suppose I can read this, a little undertone like that. You think, what are you doing? You people here are worshipping you, and you're just destroying the whole thing. So I think if you're going to go out and, try and talk to people, you've got to try hard to get them on your side. So I enjoy it. And also, maybe I'm tempting fate, let's touch wood here, but if you do events again and again and again in all different places and varying it, you never get nervous, because if things go wrong, maybe it isn't your fault, maybe it's just a funny audience or something, but you just go on to the next. Because the very first few events I did, I was really, really anxious and didn't really want to read from the book because they would see I was trembling. But now it's just like talking to friends. So, and I get a buzz from it. And I don't think anything really changes that feeling. Why do actors go on stage? Because they want that live, just joy from people if you've done your job well.
I think because you've done so many events and met so many of your fans and have really engaged with people over the years, you have become this sort of revered figure among a generation of particularly female readers, but as you say, not exclusively. Have you found it strange, therefore, that there's quite a lot of interest in your personal life that has come with it, especially in 2020, I think it was, when you published a book with gay characters in it and then talked about your own relationship? Did you find it odd that people cared, or did you think it was inevitable?
I thought I knew that if I wrote a book about a girl who is in love or has a crush on another girl at school, which I thought was a story that needed to be told, although it certainly wasn't autobiographical at all, which many people thought. And to a friend who I went around with a lot in school days, I think she was quite horrified that people would think she was one of these girls. Anyway, I knew, and I think the publicists knew, that if I wrote a book about, say, young gay love, attention would be put on me. And I was never in any closet, because every single person that knew me in the book world knew perfectly well I was living with Trish. We've been together 23 years. I really felt it would be quite icky if I had did one of the, now I'm proud to tell everybody, etc. I mean, I'm very open, but don't want to make statements all the time. And so I knew that this was going to be a talking point. And so I did an interview, a lovely one for The Guardian, with a journalist who I'd met before and knew would be sensible. And that was fine. And then I am touching wood again, but I don't think anybody has particularly objected or thought it odd or whatever. It's okay. I mean, I'm quite proud in that, some people have called me a gay icon. I mean, I don't think I'm going to be marching with pride and blowing my whistle and everything. I'm a little bit too old for that. But it's very nice to be welcomed by the gay community and, to feel that this is a lovely thing. But I don't necessarily want to be thought of just as a gay author or a straight author or any kind of author, apart from the fact that I want to be an author still. And I think it's probably the least interesting thing about me. But it's been a long time, and I feel I was married for 30 years to a man, and then I had 6 years on my own, and then now I've had 23 years with Trish, ex-bookseller. That's how we met. And I am determined to make it 34 years with her, and then I'll shuffle off this mortal coil.
Brilliant. Well, Jacqueline, look, thank you for being such a fascinating and broad-ranging guest on the podcast, and wishing you all the best with your numerous projects going forward.
Thank you so much. I mean, what could be more delightful than natter on about yourself all the time?
That was the Always Take Notes interview with Jacqueline Wilson. She's on Instagram at JacquelineWilson_HQ. She's on X at JackieWilsonHQ. And her latest book, The Seaside Sleepover, is published by Puffin. Hello, it's us again. Simon, what was your takeaway from the interview with Jacqueline?
I thought she was a very cool lady. I mean, it was quite the afternoon because we did Jojo Moyes live in front of an audience, and then we retreated into the seclusion of a podcast pod at Hay Festival to speak to Jacqueline.
I think you mean podcast sauna. We were all
it was
sweating by the end of that.
Really hot. But I think I mentioned this actually when we put the Jojo Moyes episode out, but I found it pretty inspiring actually that both of these two women who are super big names now, what you don't see is that reflects a lifetime of work and of kind of consistency and professionalism over years. So, she both had her like twinkly grandma vibe, with her rings and stuff, but also a very professional writer operating as a professional and as a business and stuff like that. I thought it was really cool and genuinely pretty inspiring. What about you?
Absolutely. You were reflecting, I think, at the end of the last episode that a number of people had reached out to you about Jessie Armstrong, and it was the kind of first interview where people were coming out of the woodwork saying how cool it was. And for me, it's been Jacqueline Wilson. We put that picture on Instagram, and women from across my life have kind of messaged me to say how cool it was and what an influence she'd had on their formative years. And actually off air, I told Jacqueline Wilson of the story of queuing for hours to meet her with my sister. And she was delightful then and she was delightful now. I was slightly surprised actually on that note to hear that she kind of feels that she's lost some of that centrality in people's lives, because the amount of messages I had expressing jealousy that I'd had the chance to meet her kind of suggests otherwise. And otherwise, I thought it was really interesting to hear what children's literature was like when she emerged onto the scene and how she sort of popularised fiction that dealt with dark and sometimes traumatic themes in a way that children could kind of process and get their head around. So yeah, as you say, an inspiring and well-rounded interview. Anyway, Simon, what have you been up to?
I have been really just doing lots of admin because I'm waiting to get edits back on my book, and then the magazine work I'm doing, one thing I'm waiting for an edit and the others are continental European stories, which are impossible to do in August because everyone's on holiday. So I'm just taking this time to do some admin, and so I did a whole bunch of sort of organising and sorting stuff out last week in London, and then I'm up doing some stuff in Cambridge and I'm doing my taxes next week. And actually it's kind of quite I'm really glad to do it and to get on top of this stuff. It's quite Marie Kondo-esque meditative. And in terms of reading, I finally finished Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, including all the bits on philosophy, which are quite hard going. But it actually has at the end a selection of letters between him and his publisher, the edition I was reading, which talks about the publication history and how, this was a pretty weird and offbeat book that no one wanted to publish, and then it became a sensation. So there's a kind of inside baseball bit there that's quite interesting. And then on TV stuff, I'm watching with my partner Hyun a Netflix show called Critical, which is for the general public about trauma care in London, but for Hyun it's just her mates, so it's like quite interesting to see her howl with amusement at them and stuff like that. So that's what I've been up to. Anyway, what about you, Rachel? What have you been up to and what have you been consuming?
I have been...
Apart from the whole Bailey Gifford shortlist, presumably.
Yes. Not quite shortlist yet. The next meeting is long list. But yes, I've been doing my Bailey Gifford reading. In fact, next to me here is 5 boxes full of books. Yeah. Other than that, I went to see Oasis in Edinburgh, which I don't know if I've mentioned. Maybe I have a couple of times. I grew up in Manchester, so it felt like a very important cultural moment for me. Although, as I was telling Simon off air, not an ideal concert experience. I saw basically every type of bodily fluid there is to see. I saw a lot of drug taking, shoving. Many people threw beers over me. I suppose that's all part of it. But it was not quite what I was hoping for. But it was great at the same time, because I never thought I would see Oasis play live. So, yes, worth doing.
Very good. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acombe.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvin. Our score is by Jessica Danheiser, and our graphic design is by James Edgar.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram at Always Take Notes. We're on X at Take Notes Always. If you'd like to support us on our crowdfunding page on Patreon, we're on there under Always Take Notes. And if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes or get in touch with us via our website, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.